If someone had told me 10 years ago that I would end up here in this quiet morning light, watching Julian make coffee in my kitchen, I would have laughed. Not a real laugh, but the dry, papery sound of disbelief I reserve for things too impossible to even properly imagine. Julian in my space. Julian, with his sleep-rumpled hair and the soft gray t-shirt that I now knew he favored for sleeping. It was a scene of such profound domesticity, such gentle normalcy, that it felt like a dream I was terrified to wake from. For a decade, he was a fixed point in the constellations of my life, a distant burning star I observed from the safety of my telescope, never once believing I could ever get close enough to feel the warmth. My life, before him, was a carefully curated collection of quiet moments. I was a man who lived in the margins, in the footnotes of other people's louder, more vibrant stories. My apartment was my sanctuary, a fortress built of books and silence. Each spine on the shelf was a friend, each story a world I could enter and leave without risk. I had my routine. Coffee at 7, work at the university archive at 8:30, lunch at my desk, home by 6, a new book before bed. It was a life measured in turned pages and the soft hum of the radiator, and I had convinced myself it was enough. Julian was my older brother's best friend. He was everything I was not. He was loud where I was quiet, confident where I was hesitant, built of solid muscle and easy laughter while I felt assembled from nervous energy and brittle bone. He existed in the center of every room he entered, a gravitational force pulling people into his orbit. I was a satellite, content to watch from a safe, lonely distance. At family barbecues, I would see him, a beer in one hand, gesturing with the other as he told some story that had my brother and his friends roaring with laughter. I would catalog the details, the way the sun caught the gold flecks in his brown hair, the network of fine lines that fanned from the corners of his eyes when he smiled, the effortless way he occupied his own skin, a comfort I could not comprehend. He was a carpenter, his hands large and calloused, instruments of creation that seemed so at odds with my own, which were pale and stained with archival ink. To him, I was just Leo, my brother's quiet, bookish younger sibling. He would offer a polite nod, a quick, "Hey man," before turning back to the real conversations, the real life happening in the center of the room. I was scenery, a piece of the background. And for years, that was the agonizing, unspoken arrangement between us. He was the sun, and I was the shadow he cast. The distance between us was not just physical. It was a chasm of personality, of experience, of two entirely different ways of moving through the world. Then came the disruption. The cosmic joke the universe decided to play on my meticulously ordered existence. My brother, David, was getting married. The wedding was a 700-mile drive away, a rustic affair in a state I had never visited. The plan was simple, safe. I would ride with my parents. I would sit in the back, lose myself in a book, and endure the requisite small talk. I could manage that. But the day before we were set to leave, the engine in my parents' car died a slow, sputtering death. A sigh of steam, a final clank, and then silence. My mother's panic was immediate. My father's frustration, a low thunder. And my own dread, a cold, smooth stone sinking in my stomach. "Julian is driving up alone," David said over the phone, his voice tinny and distant. "He's leaving tomorrow morning. You could just go with him, just go with him." The words echoed in my head. A 2-day road trip, trapped in a small, enclosed space with the one person on earth who could unravel me with a single glance. It was not a suggestion, it was a sentence. My meticulously built walls, my carefully maintained distance, were about to be bulldozed by a 4-door sedan and 700 miles of open road. The quiet hum of my life was about to be replaced by the roar of an engine and the terrifying, amplified sound of Julian's breathing. The morning he arrived, the air was thick with a damp, pre-dawn chill. I had been awake for hours, my heart a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. I had packed and repacked my duffel bag 3 times, as if the perfect arrangement of shirts and socks could somehow protect me. His truck was exactly what I'd expected. Large, practical, a little bit battered. It smelled of sawdust, coffee, and something uniquely him, a scent I had only ever caught in passing, clean and masculine and utterly unnerving. He swung my bag into the back with an ease that made my own efforts seem clumsy and frail. "Ready to go, bookworm?" he asked, a lazy grin on his face. It wasn't mean-spirited, it was just what he called me, what he saw me as. The nickname was another brick in the wall between us. I nodded, unable to form words. I slid into the passenger seat, the upholstery cool against my skin. The cab felt both vast and suffocating. He climbed in, and the space shrank, filled by his presence. He started the engine, and a low rumble seemed to vibrate right through my bones. We pulled away from the curb, leaving my quiet street, my safe world, behind in the growing light. The first few hours were a study in silence. A thick, palpable silence that I was too afraid to break. Julian seemed unaffected. He turned on the radio, a low thrum of classic rock filling the space between us. His left hand rested on the steering wheel, his right on the center console, mere inches from my own. I kept my hands clenched tightly in my lap, my knuckles white. I risked a glance at him. From this proximity, I could see things I'd never noticed before. A small, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a tiny imperfection in his otherwise handsome face. The faint stubble darkening his jaw, darker than the hair on his head. The way his throat moved when he swallowed a mouthful of coffee from his thermos. He was not a distant star anymore. He was a man, a collection of tangible, human details, and the reality of him was overwhelming. My observation was supposed to be my shield, my way of understanding the world without having to participate in it. But here, in this truck, it was a liability. Every detail I noticed was another piece of kindling on the slow-burning fire of my decade-long infatuation. The way his thumb tapped a rhythm against the wheel in time with the music. The focused line of his brow as he navigated the morning traffic. The sheer, solid presence of him. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. I was acutely aware of my own breathing, my own posture. I sat ramrod straight, tried to take up as little space as possible, as if I could somehow shrink myself back into the scenery where I belonged. "You can relax, you know," he said, his voice startling me out of my internal spiral. He hadn't taken his eyes off the road. "I don't bite," my face flushed with heat. "I am relaxed," I lied, the words feeling stiff and foreign in my mouth. He chuckled, a low, warm sound. "Right. You look like you're about to face a firing squad." I didn't have a response to that. Because it was true. This felt like an execution of my peace, my control. All I could do was stare out the window at the blur of passing trees, my reflection a pale, anxious ghost against the glass. We stopped for lunch at a roadside diner, one of those places with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner. The sudden immersion in noise and the smell of frying bacon was a jolt to my system after the quiet intensity of the truck. We slid into a booth opposite each other. The table felt too small. His knees were impossibly close to mine under the table. I angled my legs away, pressing them against the wall of the booth. He ordered a burger and fries without even looking at the menu. I spent 5 minutes studying it, my eyes scanning the words without absorbing them, before ordering the first thing I saw. The waitress set down a basket of condiments between us. I reached for the salt, my movements jerky. At the exact same moment, Julian reached for it too. The back of his hand brushed against mine. It was nothing, a flicker of contact, less than a second. But for me, it was a lightning strike. A jolt of pure, unadulterated heat shot up my arm, straight to my chest, where it exploded. My heart hammered. I snatched my hand back as if I'd touched a hot stove. My breath caught in my throat. I stared down at my own hand, half expecting to see it scorched. It tingled, the phantom sensation of his skin still there. A brand. I risked to look up at him through my lashes. He was shaking salt onto his fries, his expression unreadable. Did he feel it? Did he even notice? Of course he didn't. To him, it was an accident, a meaningless collision of atoms. To me, it was everything. A confirmation of the impossible distance between our two realities. What was a cataclysm for me was not even a footnote for him. I spent the rest of the meal pushing food around my plate, my stomach a churning knot of bees. The silence that followed in the truck was different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the memory of that touch, with the frantic monologue in my own head. I kept replaying it, analyzing it, torturing myself with it. The casual warmth of his skin, the rough texture. It was the most intimate contact I had ever had with him, and it was over before it began. As afternoon bled into evening, the sky turned a bruised purple. Rain began to fall, first as a light tapping, then as a relentless downpour that blurred the world outside into abstract streaks of light and color. The rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers became the soundtrack to my anxiety. Then it happened. A sudden jolt. A loud bang that sounded like a gunshot, followed by a rhythmic thump, thump, thump that vibrated through the floor of the truck. Julian swore under his breath, a sharp, guttural sound. He expertly steered the truck onto the shoulder of the deserted highway. He killed the engine. In the sudden silence, the sound of the rain hammering on the roof was deafening. Flat, he said, the single word heavy with frustration. He stared out the windshield for a moment, his jaw tight. For the first time, I saw a crack in his armor of easy confidence. He looked tired, annoyed, human. He sighed and opened his door, plunging into the deluge. I watched, useless, from the dry warmth of the cab as he wrestled the spare tire and the jack from the back. The beam of his phone's flashlight cut a frantic path through the darkness. He worked with a grim determination, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead, soaking his jacket. I should get out. I should help. But what could I do? I knew less than nothing about changing a tire. I would just be in the way, another problem for him to solve. So I sat, my hands clenched, my guilt a cold, heavy blanket. After several minutes of grunting and the metallic scrape of the tire iron, I heard him curse again, louder this time. He kicked the flat tire, a burst of pure, raw frustration. He leaned his hands against the side of the truck, his head hanging down, rain sluicing off him in sheets. Something shifted in me then. Seeing him defeated, even by something as mundane as a stubborn lug nut, changed the dynamic. He was not the infallible, confident man from the barbecues. He was just a guy, stuck on the side of a dark road in the pouring rain, failing at a task he was supposed to be good at. I opened my door and stepped out into the storm. The cold shock of the rain was immediate. "What's wrong?" I shouted over the downpour. He looked up, surprised to see me. His face was slick with rain, his eyes dark in the gloom. "This last nut is rusted on. I can't get enough leverage to break it." He was breathing heavily, his frustration palpable. And in that moment, a strange memory surfaced. A diagram from a high school physics textbook. A lesson on torque and levers. An idea, absurd and unlikely, formed in my mind. "Do you have a rock or something? Something solid?" I asked, my voice thin against the wind. He gave me a look that was a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "A rock? Leo, I need a blowtorch, not a rock. No, just trust me," I said, a flicker of confidence I didn't know I possessed igniting within me. I found a fist-sized piece of broken asphalt on the shoulder. "Put the tire iron on the nut. Then use this rock under the end of it as a fulcrum. It'll give you a longer lever arm. More torque." He stared at me for a long moment. I could see the skepticism in his eyes, warring with his desperation. Finally, with a shrug, he did as I said. He positioned the iron, wedged the rock underneath it, and then put his full weight on the very end of the handle. There was a loud groan of protesting metal, a sharp crack, and then the nut gave way. He stumbled back, the tire iron clattering to the pavement. He looked from the loosened nut to the rock and then to me. The expression on his face was one of pure, unadulterated shock. He wasn't looking at Leo, the bookworm. He was looking at me, really looking at me. "How in the hell did you know that would work?" he asked, his voice full of genuine wonder. "Physics," I said, and for the first time on this entire trip, I felt my lips curve into a small, real smile. We finished changing the tire in a strange, new kind of silence. It wasn't tense or awkward. It was companionable. We worked together, him handling the heavy lifting, me holding the flashlight steady, a silent, efficient team against the storm. By the time we were back in the truck, we were both soaked to the bone and shivering. Julian cranked the heat, and the warm air felt like a blessing. "I'm not driving any further tonight," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "We'll find the next motel and stop." I just nodded, my teeth chattering. The power dynamic had been irrevocably altered. I had, in a small but significant way, rescued him. The playing field, for the first time in a decade, felt level. The motel was a sad, flickering beacon off the highway. The neon sign for the Starlight Inn had a dead, so it just read Starlight Inn. The paint was peeling, the parking lot pocked with puddles that reflected the sickly yellow light. Julian went into the office while I waited in the truck, the engine rumbling. I watched his silhouette through the rain-streaked window. He was talking to someone behind the counter, gesturing, then shaking his head. My stomach tightened. He came back and slid into the driver's seat, bringing a gust of cold, wet air with him. He let out a long sigh. "Good news and bad news," he said, running a hand through his damp hair. "Good news is they have a room. Bad news is it's the last 1 inch." He paused, looking at me. "It has 2 beds." My heart did a slow, painful flip in my chest. 2 beds. 1 room. The forced proximity of the truck was about to be compressed into the suffocating intimacy of a 20 by 20 foot box. "It's fine," I heard myself say, my voice sounding distant and hollow. "It's just for 1 night." He nodded, though he didn't look convinced. He looked nervous. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and damp carpet. A single, dim lamp cast long, distorted shadows on the wood-paneled walls. The 2 double beds, covered in thin, faded floral bedspreads, looked comically large in the small space. They were separated by a small nightstand, a flimsy barrier against the charged atmosphere that had followed us inside. We moved around each other with a new, stilted awkwardness. Julian dropped his wet jacket on a chair and disappeared into the bathroom. I heard the shower start, the sound of rushing water, a temporary relief from the crushing silence. I sat on the edge of the bed farthest from the door, my duffel bag at my feet. I could feel the dampness from my jeans seeping into the bedspread. I felt utterly out of place, an intruder in a scene that was too raw, too real. This was not an observation from a distance. This was happening to me. When Julian came out of the bathroom, he was wearing a pair of sweatpants and the gray t-shirt. His hair was dark and wet, clinging to his scalp. A towel was slung around his neck. He looked younger, more vulnerable without his usual layers of clothing and confidence. He didn't look at me as he crossed the room to his own bed. "Your turn," he mumbled, his back to me. My shower was a frantic 5-minute affair. I stood under the weak spray, the water barely warm, and tried to wash away the nervous energy thrumming under my skin. But the room was waiting for me. He was waiting for me. When I came out, dressed in my own pajamas, he was already in his bed, lying on his side, facing the wall. The only light came from a lamp on the nightstand between us, casting a soft, golden glow. I crossed to my own bed, my bare feet silent on the worn carpet. I slid under the covers, the sheets cool and starchy. I lay on my back, staring at the textured ceiling. The silence was a living thing. It was composed of the hum of the ancient air conditioner, the distant rush of cars on the highway, the patter of rain against the window. And underneath it all, the one sound my ears strained for, the soft, rhythmic sound of Julian's breathing. In, out, a steady, quiet cadence that was both a comfort and a torment. He was only a few feet away. If I reached out my hand, I could probably touch his bed. The thought was so terrifying, so tempting, that I curled my fingers into a tight fist under the blanket. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I knew he wasn't asleep. I could feel his wakefulness in the air, a tension that mirrored my own. "You're quiet," his voice, when it came, was soft, a low rumble in the darkness. It startled me so much I flinched. "I'm always quiet," I whispered back to the ceiling. "No," he said, and I heard the rustle of sheets as he shifted, turning to face me. I kept my eyes fixed on the ceiling, afraid to look at him. "Not like this. This is a different kind of quiet." I didn't know how to answer that. He was right. This quiet was heavy with everything I had left unsaid for a decade. "I always thought you didn't like me," he said, his voice still soft, but with a new edge of vulnerability. "All those years, at David's house, you'd barely even look at me. I figured you thought I was just some Dumb jock. Your brother's stupid friend. The confession hung in the air between us, so unexpected it knocked the breath from my lungs. Him? Insecure about what I thought of him? The idea was ludicrous. Impossible. Slowly, I turned my head on the pillow to look at him. In the dim light, I could just make out the shape of him, a shadow propped up on one elbow, looking at me across the small gulf that separated our beds. I never thought you were stupid, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The honesty of it felt like a stone being lifted from my chest. I was intimidated. He was silent for a moment, processing that. Intimidated? By me? Why? Here it was. The precipice. I could retreat, make a joke, change the subject. Or I could jump. For 10 years, I had lived on this cliff edge, staring down at the terrifying drop. You were just so much, I said, struggling for the words. You walk into a room and you fill it up. I've always felt like I was trying to disappear into the corners. I never knew how to talk to you. He laid back down, his voice softer now, closer. Why did you want to? The question was a key, turning a lock deep inside me. The truth, the real, unvarnished, terrifying truth, spilled out before I could stop it. Because I wanted it since I was 16, the silence that followed was absolute. The air conditioner clicked off. The rain stopped. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting. My own heart was a deafening drum in my ears. I had done it. I had said it. I had taken a decade of secret longing and laid it bare on the floral bedspread of a cheap motel room. I closed my eyes, bracing for the rejection, the pity, the awkward laughter. Instead, I heard the whisper of sheets. My eyes flew open. Julian was sitting up. Then he was standing. He crossed the small space between our beds in 2 silent steps. My breath hitched. He sat down on the edge of my mattress. The bed dipped with his weight, rolling me slightly toward him. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, his eyes searching my face in the dim light. His expression was one I had never seen before. It was not confidence or amusement. It was something raw, something questioning, something hopeful. My mind was a white-hot panic. This is it. This is the moment you ruin everything. Your brother's best friend. He just being kind. Don't misread this. But then he lifted a hand, his large, calloused, carpenter's hand, and gently brushed a stray piece of hair from my forehead. The touch was feather-light, but it sent another shockwave through my entire system. This was not an accident. This was intentional. He leaned in slow, hesitant, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to stop him. I was frozen, not by fear, but by a powerful, terrifying wave of wanting. I didn't move. I couldn't. His lips met mine. It was not a kiss of passion, not the kind you see in movies. It was softer, more fragile than that. It was a question. It was hesitant and searching, his lips barely brushing against mine, a tentative exploration. It tasted of coffee and rain and a deep, aching loneliness I recognized as a mirror of my own. I let out a shaky breath, and in that small surrender, the kiss deepened. I lifted my own trembling hand and rested it on his arm, feeling the solid, warm muscle beneath his t-shirt. It was real. This was real. He was real. The kiss was a confession, a conversation without words. It spoke of years of misconnections, of misunderstandings, of a hidden current of feeling that had been flowing beneath the surface all along. It was the most honest thing I had ever experienced. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. We stayed like that for a long moment, just breathing the same air, our worlds having been irrevocably, terrifyingly, beautifully tilted on their axis. I woke with a start, my heart pounding. The first light of dawn was filtering through the thin curtains, painting the room in shades of gray. For a blissful, disoriented second, I forgot where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The rain, the motel, the kiss. Julian. I turned my head. He was back in his own bed, his back to me, the steady rise and fall of his shoulders the only indication that he was asleep. He had returned to his side of the room at some point in the night, leaving me alone with the ghost of his touch on my lips. And the panic began, a cold, creeping dread that started in my stomach and spread through my limbs, leaving me icy and numb. What had I done? What had we done? The darkness had provided a false intimacy, a temporary courage that had evaporated with the morning light. My mind, my greatest betrayer, started its relentless assault. He felt sorry for you. You confessed your sad little crush, and he took pity on you. Or maybe he was just tired and lonely. A moment of weakness. A mistake. You made everything impossibly weird. You've ruined your brother's friendship. You've ruined everything. The self-recrimination was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The memory of the kiss, which had been so beautiful and honest in the dark, now seemed shameful, a monumental error in judgment. I had to get out. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, my movements stiff and robotic. I gathered my clothes and slipped into the bathroom, closing the door without making a sound. I dressed in the cramped, humid space, my fingers fumbling with the buttons on my shirt. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were wide with panic, my face pale. I looked like a ghost. When I came out, Julian was awake. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, scrubbing his hands through his hair. He looked tired. He didn't look at me. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words, with the crushing weight of the morning after. The intimacy of the night before had shattered, leaving behind sharp, glittering shards of awkwardness. I'll load my bag in the truck, I mumbled, not meeting his eyes. I grabbed my duffel and practically fled the room, desperate for the cold morning air. The rest of the drive was a special kind of hell. We sat in a silence that was a universe away from the companionable quiet of the previous day. This was a tense, brittle silence, filled with regret and anxiety. The radio was off. The space between us felt like a mile-wide canyon. I stared out the passenger window, watching the landscape pass in a meaningless blur, my internal monologue a screaming, chaotic loop of self-doubt. We arrived at the wedding venue, a sprawling rustic lodge, in the early afternoon. We parted ways with a muttered, "See you later," that sounded like a final goodbye. The wedding festivities were a nightmare. I was surrounded by happy, celebrating people, but I had never felt more alone. My solitude, once a comfortable refuge, was now a painful, hollow ache. It was tainted by the memory of not being alone, of sharing a space, a kiss, a moment of profound connection with Julian. Now, that connection felt like a phantom limb, its absence a constant, throbbing pain. I saw him across the rehearsal dinner hall. He was immediately enveloped by David and his other friends, a beer in his hand, a smile on his face. He was back in his element, the center of gravity, the confident, easygoing man everyone knew. It was as if the motel room had never happened, as if I had imagined the whole thing. The sight of it was a knife in my gut. He was fine. I was the one who was broken. I had misinterpreted everything. I spent the evening in the corners, true to form, making myself as small as possible. I nursed a single glass of wine, the acidic taste doing little to soothe my frayed nerves. I watched him from afar, the old, familiar dynamic reasserting itself with a vengeance. He laughed. He told stories, and he never once looked in my direction. Each moment he didn't look at me was another confirmation of my fears. It was a mistake. I was a mistake. The next day, the day of the wedding, was even worse. I went through the motions, a polite, smiling automaton. I watched my brother get married, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. At the reception, the music was loud, the lights were low, and the forced joviality was suffocating. I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped out a side door and found myself in a small, quiet garden illuminated by strings of fairy lights. The cool night air was a relief on my hot skin. I leaned against a stone wall, closing my eyes, trying to find the quiet center of myself that had been obliterated over the past 48 hours. Leo, my eyes snapped open. His voice. He was standing a few feet away, a dark silhouette against the bright lights of the reception hall. He wasn't smiling. The confident facade was gone. He looked as anxious and lost as I felt. "Hey," I managed, my voice hoarse. He took a step closer. "Can we talk?" I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. He ran a hand over the back of his neck, a nervous gesture I'd never seen him make before. I'm sorry, he started, his voice low. About this morning. And the drive. I was an ass, it's fine, I said automatically, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. No, it's not fine, he insisted, taking another step. We were closer now. I could see the genuine distress in his eyes. I panicked, Leo. I woke up this morning and I freaked out. That's never happened to me before. What's never happened before? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, needing to hear it, needing to understand. He looked at me, his gaze intense. Feeling like that, with you, it scared the hell out of me. It felt important. And that's terrifying. He let out a shaky breath. I thought you regretted it. You were so quiet. You looked like you couldn't get away from me fast enough. I figured I'd completely misread everything, that I'd cross a line. His words were a balm on my raw, wounded heart. He had felt it too. He had been just as scared. The mirror image of my own anxiety. I thought you regretted it. I confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush of relief. You went back to your own bed. You didn't say anything. Then at the dinner, you were back to being you, and I was back to being me. I thought it was a fluke. A moment of pity, a flicker of pain, crossed his face. Pity? God, no, Leo. It wasn't pity. He closed the remaining distance between us. He was so close now, I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. These last 2 days have been the most unbearable, horrible days of my life. Being in the same room with you and not being able to talk to you, not being able to even look at you because I was so afraid of what I'd see in your eyes. It was awful. I don't want to go back to that, to how it was before. Pretending I don't see you when you're the only person in the room I'm looking for. My breath hitched. He had been looking for me. And then he did something that sealed the truth of his words, something more powerful than any confession. He reached out and took my hand. He didn't just brush it. He laced his fingers through mine, his grip firm, warm, and sure. His calloused palm against my own. A perfect fit. It was a simple gesture, but in the semi-public space of the garden, with the sounds of the party just a few feet away, it was a declaration. It was an anchor in the storm of my uncertainty. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't ashamed. He squeezed my hand gently. Let's go back in, he said, his voice steady now. Together, and we did. We walked back into the reception, hand in hand. A few people glanced, including my brother, who gave us a look of profound, dawning surprise before breaking into a slow, wide grin. Julian didn't flinch. He just led me to an empty table, pulled out a chair for me, and sat beside me, never once letting go of my hand. The quiet boy in the corner was gone. I was here in the center of the room, anchored by the man I had loved from a distance for a decade. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged there. The weeks that followed were a delicate, wonderful navigation of new territory. The drive home was the complete opposite of the drive there. We talked. We really talked. About everything and nothing. About my books and his woodworking. About our fears, our dreams. The silence, when it came, was easy and comfortable, filled with the quiet hum of a shared understanding. Now, a few months later, his presence is a staple in my quiet apartment. His heavy work boots are by the door, a wonderfully disruptive element in my orderly entryway. His favorite coffee mug, a chipped ceramic one he brought over, sits on my counter. My sanctuary, my fortress of solitude, has become a home. This morning, I watch him from the doorway of my kitchen. He's measuring coffee grounds, his movements precise and practiced. The morning sun slants through the window, catching the gold in his hair, just as it did all those years ago at those summer barbecues. But now, the distance is gone. He's here. He's real. He senses me watching and looks up, a slow, warm smile spreading across his face. It's a smile just for me, and it still makes my heart skip a beat. Morning, bookworm, he says, his voice soft and laced with sleep. The old nickname is still there, but it's different now. It's not a label that keeps me at a distance. It's a term of endearment, a private joke, a testament to how far we've come. Morning, I reply, walking over to him. I wrap my arms around his waist from behind, resting my cheek against the warm, solid plane of his back. The fabric of his gray t-shirt is soft against my skin. I can feel the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. He leans his head back against mine, And we stand like that for a moment, in the quiet of the morning, the scent of brewing coffee filling the air. It's a moment of perfect, simple domesticity. A moment of peace I never thought I would find. That road trip didn't just close a physical distance of 700 miles. It closed an emotional chasm that had defined a decade of my life. It forced me out of the margins and into the main text of my own story. Julian wasn't a disruption to my routine. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the one that made the entire story make sense. He didn't just enter my life. He showed me a version of myself I never knew existed. Someone brave enough to cross a room, to admit a feeling, to take a hand, and to build a new, shared quiet in the space where a lonely silence used to be.